Okay, welcome to my code review. We are going to be going over the code that we have here. We're going to start with section 1. There's portion 1. And so my first one I've picked is a simple appointment program. It's a Java program. It's a simple program to create a contact, task, or appointment and be able to update them. It's also a test class for each class and service. The code completely and correctly implements the design and conforms to coding standards. It's very well structured. It functions quite well, does everything it should be doing. It was extensively tested and passed all of the testing. It did very, it has, very consistent styling and formatting across all of the different classes, of which there is I think 10 classes. So that's a lot of classes for it to be very consistent on. There was not any unneeded or unreachable code in my review. There are still test classes included for each of the classes, so that may not be as necessary going forward, because once it's been extensively tested, we might be able to take those out. There's not really much in the way of arithmetic operations because it was really quite basic. It's very, I guess the most would be like equals. So if there was things that equaled, then we had a match. But other than that, it's not much outside of just simple comparisons. So there's not much in the arithmetics to be worried about, like the rounding errors, floating numbers, floating points. That's not as applicable to this particular one. And then there was very simple if loops. If and throwing new illegal argument and exception. So there's not much in complex loops on this one. There wasn't much. It gets a little bit more complex in the testing, but even still, that's just creating instances and testing the instances. There's not complex looping to be worried about. Loop termination and indexing properly. It's a very simple application. However, it's going to be translated into Python and making it more functional into actually doing something, because as of now, you could just create an appointment, a task, a contact, and update the contact, test, and appointment. And so right now it doesn't really do much. So I'm going to try to make it slightly more of like an actual function as to like why there's an appointment, task, and contacts possibly, which is going to help me demonstrate outcome 3 and 4 because I'll be solving a problem, which is getting this to function in Python. And that'll also really help me with maintaining standards, even because this is a very well documented and tested application. It's very simple, but it did pass all of its testing and it did a really good job. So we have to maintain those standards and the trade-offs between Java and Python, because Java has all the different classes and Python doesn't really work quite the same. So it's going to be figuring out how to do those trade-offs while maintaining the good standards that we have set in this original method. And so this will also demonstrate an important skill for me going forward, because many, many different places have very different languages, and things written in older languages or newer languages might have to be translated upon different programs that they decide to use. Like if the company decides to switch into new services and new databases, then I might have to translate things that I previously had written in a different language into the new language and make sure it still functions the way it's supposed to function. Next, we are going to go look at the second section of code, which was my application. So this was supposed to be an inventory application that did very simple inventory functions, with a login and register screen that then took you into a home page that should display your inventory. And then from that inventory display, you should be able to go in and edit each particular item in the inventory and get notified if the inventory dropped to 0. However, there were several bugs and issues while I was doing it. I had several sections that did not function properly. As you can see in like this section right here, I have a fix me because it was not doing what I wanted it to do, and I had to use a little bit different method in order to get it to function. So there will be several of those things that I need to go through and fix. And then there's also just the different course requirements kept me from being able to use some of like the newer methods and newer technologies. So like they didn't want a search function, but I mean that would be very helpful if I was creating something with a database. I'd want to have a search function so that I'm able to search up the new stuff, like search up an item and be able to return it. And then, the scroll view, which is a little bit more common instead of a grid or list view, that's a newer application method that's being implemented more, but that was not what was the course requirements. The course requirements required either a list or grid view, and so I wasn't able to use some of the newer views and newer functions. And there was issues with the transitions between the pages. Some of them were not functioning correctly and taking you to the correct page at first, and that took a lot of weird app writing to get it to work the way I wanted it to. And there was some excessive coding because of some issues getting the databases to function appropriately. So there's extra code in here. It's not nearly as well commented. It is got several bugs and problems throughout it. As you can see right here, there's not really much in the way of comments, just in this little one right, like there's like no comments in it. Go into this one, there's not really much in the way of commenting again. So the good news is that like the variables are properly named and casted, and they kind of are somewhat of their own commenting because they're so well named and all that, but there needs to be comments in here, and so it's easily maintainable. And then the fact that there's 2 database helpers, we've got database helper and database 2 helper, instead of being able to create the databases the way I wanted, I had to do a very interesting and unique way to get it functioning. And so there's some excessive code there, as well as the ability to use some, libraries and external functions and external components that could be plugged into this instead of having it all written out myself. And then again, there's not much in the way of arithmetic operations. There's, a little bit in the inventories just to keep track of the quantity, but that's even still a string, or it's just a number. And again, it's a comparison. It's just saying whether or not it reaches 0. So again, it's not got much in the way of arithmetic operations that we have to worry about divisors by 0 or floating numbers or rounding. So there's nothing that's really gonna cause issues in the mathematic in a mathematic way. There are simple if-else loops for the most part, and they all have an if-else, so they are terminating decently. There is not crazy case blocks or anything in here. There's not major loops. There are a few if-else chains, and they tend to be pretty well the most common starting. Such as in this one, we're looking at adding an item if name is empty, if description is empty, if quantity is empty. So it's testing first just for empty. So if someone's trying to add an item and they just don't fill out a field, that's more likely. And then you have the next thing so if all of them are in and filled, then we can go moving to the next case. So it does test the most likely case first, and then the next case you move it in, and You create the item, and if it got created, great. If not, it didn't add for some reason. So we need to figure out why it didn't add. There's not really much input validation because as you see here, it's literally just seeing if it's empty or not. So that doesn't help us with if somebody wanted to do crazy inputs into the name, description, and quantity into our database. If they ended up putting, a massively long name, it could be problematic. So that might be something to address, which would be some of the input validation that's lacking in this app so far. And on this one, because it's gotten so messy, it's gotten very, very messy as I was working in it and trying to get it to do what I needed it to do. I am likely going to almost entirely start over, especially considering I'm going to be implementing a bunch of new libraries and technologies and making it a little bit more functional. So that's going to be taking the good from this one and creating a new one that uses the good parts and the things that were working well, such as the login and registration screen that worked well, and being able to put those into a new application that is functioning appropriately and is using things like scroll view and a search function. And I'm going to also make sure that that's consistently branded. Essentially, I'm going to use the same colors throughout and make sure that it's very consistent, which is lacking in this one. There's a couple different color schemes on different pages and different button styles. So I'm going to make all of that more streamlined and more consistent across the application. And so all of this will demonstrate outcomes 3 and 4 again, because it's going to be solving a lot of the problems that already exist in this application and making a more functional application. And it's also going to demonstrate my ability to work with new and innovative technologies and skills and some of the newer tools to be able to accomplish this goal of creating a functional, attractive application that's more consistent throughout the application. And it's also going to be utilizing a database, which is going to be a little bit more pulling in my focus of data. And then for the final code we're going to go over is going to be this one right here. So this one is my dashboard for an animal shelter search function for a search and rescue organization. It is complete and correctly implements the design. It conforms to the standards. It's very well structured and consistent. There's not any unused code in here. I would say it is very well commented, if also possibly even a little over commented, because it was a Jupyter notebook inside of a course. So there is lots of information here that I don't necessarily need to keep throughout the whole thing. Like, I don't necessarily need to keep all of this information because it's a little bit more than we need. However, when this app was running, it functioned well. However, it was very, very simplistic and it was not very visually interesting. There was a geolocation feature that was a little bit unnecessary because they were all in the same shelter. So that geolocation feature was not very helpful. And a chart that was a very cluttered chart, just due to the choice, which was to display by breeds. And that made it very, very cluttered because the breeds were entered in multiple different manners. And so then you ended up with a lot of variables in a pie chart. It does utilize a lot of libraries and external components. As we can see here at the top, we have all of the, import modules for the dashboard components. We have all of the different plotting routines. So there's a lot of importing was done there. A lot of external components were used, which is fantastic, which kept this code very simple for it being a web database. This is a pretty simple set of code for a full functioning web database. And then again, there's not much in the arithmetic operations. It's very database focused. There's a It's just comparisons again, you know. So very not having to worry about rounding or missing zeros. It's very much a lack of math being utilized in this one. We do have try and except blocks and also if blocks. So we have, tries and accepts. So we have the error handling there. And then we have if, try, accept. So they are a little bit more. There's not any majorly nested ones, really. It's a lot more simplistic, very easy, simple functions. And the CRUD section here, has some error handling, which is excellent for making sure that we don't pull in any missing files and that we are handling the errors so we're not crashing out our database if for whatever reason there's an error. We're not going to crash the dashboard. We're going to have error handling in our searches in our database. So the main focus for this one is to create a nicer dashboard that functions better. I do have to overcome the lack of access to the original database that was being used. There was an original database with about 1,500 inputs or with 1,500 entries. And I am not going to have access to that, so I'm going to have to create my own database to use. It's probably not going to be 1,500 because it's a lot of entries to create. So we'll have to utilize a different type of database. And also maybe be able to write this a little bit differently so that it could be used for any database, because as of now it's currently set for a very specific database. As you can see right here, we have it setting it strictly to like a certain database. And so it would be better to have it maybe not be quite so specific. So it could be applied to other ones. We could put the database up here in our initialization, or we could even do it on the dashboard in our dashboard initialization. So when we're creating the very first one, we could accept inputs for the databases instead of hard coding them in on the CRUD. We could make it to where over here, there is the ability to connect to a certain database, the database you're choosing, which makes this a more functional dashboard in general, because then you'd be able to use it with any database from any animal shelter that you're trying to search through to find suitable candidates, which I think would solve much more of the problem for the clients than it currently does, which is how that would, again, demonstrate outcome 3, because that would be solving a problem for the clients. And then outcome 4, it's going to be updating and improving it, and making it just more visually appealing. Especially that's going to be my outcome 2, which is visual communication. So it's going to give me lots of more visually communicated, make it more visually appealing, and make it more functional, because as of now the visuals on it aren't actually enhancing the situation. So we should be using visuals that actually make the dashboard better instead of just cluttered. And so that is the code review of all 3 sections. And hopefully I have not bitten off more than I can chew.